Good evening, one and all. It's a pleasure to have dear members, friends, and new names in our midst today. We shall begin shortly. Good evening, dear friends, mariners, maritime enthusiasts, and supporters of MHS. My name is Soni Vadhwa, and I'll be your host for the program. We are honored to have you present with us this monsoon evening. We welcome everyone. We welcome author and curator Anjali Purohit as well. Thank you for being with us, ma'am. Today is the second of our monsoon musings, exploring the maritime medium through literature. As we are all set to begin, let me announce a few house rules to help you enjoy the program. Type your comments and observations by clicking on the Q&A button on your left. As always, your engagement with the presentation today will make us all richer. Click on the video icon on bottom right to minimize the video window. You'll then be able to see the video and the PPT clearly. Once the presentation is done, you can switch it back on to see the presenters or speakers as they talk. If you log out by mistake, please join back using the same link that you used to join right now. Let me familiarize you with how this evening is planned. First is the introduction. Next is the audiovisual presentation we have made exclusively for premiering right now in your presence. This is the core part of today's evening, exploring maritime medium through literature. Third in line is a special guest of honor we have with us to deliver the closing remarks, followed by our director making a couple of announcements regarding the upcoming events at MHS. If you end up missing out on any aspect or experience any technical glitches, rest assured that the program will be released on YouTube as soon as it gets processed for editing. We'll share the details with you. Please bear with us as we experiment with technology here. And thank you for your patience as audience and supporters. Let's begin at the beginning to set the context of the program. Earlier, we used to conduct a lecture series to celebrate the monsoon. This year, given the pandemic and the lockdown, we have strived to do programs suitable to the digital platform. Our first monsoon musing was a talk delivered by Rear Admiral R.J. Nadkarni on navigation methods of ancient mariners. We are thankful to the support you extended to us at that time. As we were planning the entire series, one of our research associates, Janvi Lokegaonkar, came up with the idea of having a celebration through literary readings. We agreed that it was a great idea and everyone got started. You will see her read from Ernest Hemingway today. So once Janvi got us thinking, we had Denard D'Souza, another research associate, dig into the ancient Indian literary texts that he's normally buried into. He dug out a Jataka and well, you'll see it. Amruta got started with rehearsing her piece to get it right and working on putting together all the visuals you have been seeing so far. Aishwarya, our project research associate, added a non-English Indian voice today, and she found a powerful piece indeed. Sabha, our academic assistant, occupied a piece too, and she's made it her own in her own charming way. And finally, Ashwini, our archives and collections associate, stuck to Tagore. She's given it a touch of energy that she normally brings to everything. With that, I think we are set to go. The readings include national and international literatures. In store are poems and narratives about the sea in multiple contexts. Journey, fear, culture, human will, stages of life, and maritime heritage. Let us immerse ourselves into the experience of the ocean as we immerse ourselves into the literature about it. What you will now see is a video we have put together to blend the reading, viewing, and listening experiences. Drop your comments and observations to share what you make of the readings. Thank you, and let it play. Hello and welcome to Maritime History Society's celebration of the monsoon through the second monsoon musings. We take this opportunity to explore the maritime medium through literature. Why literature? Because it does something special to our understanding of how the sea was perceived historically. In the historical memory we have of India's and world's modern past, we see the oceanic voyages as narratives of conquests, as means to create empires. And as all that is mesmerizing about the maritime medium, we found that the literary expressions of engaging with the sea mean personal journeys as well. In many ways, it is ironic. What normally is associated with conquest becomes a medium of the conquest of fear. The literature we have compiled is about these different kinds of conquests: conquest of self, conquest of fear, and a source of joy and freedom.
Hi, this is Denard D'Souza. I'm a research associate at the Maritime History Society, where my work profile is the recording of India's ancient maritime heritage. So let's begin with a text from ancient India. This is the Suparika Jataka, one of the Jatakas thought to have been written between 300 BC to 400 AD. I'll not be reading the whole Jataka, but an excerpt that describes a strange voyage on the ocean. They sailed in their ship upon the high seas. For 7 days the ship sailed without mishap. Then an unseasonable wind arose. 4 months the vessels tossed about on a primeval ocean, until she arrived at what is called the Kuramala Sea. Your fish with bodies like men and razor-sharp snouts dive in and out of the water. The merchants observing these asked the great being what the sea was named, repeating the first stanza. Men with razor-pointed noses, rising up and down, speak Suparika and tell us by what name the sea is known. The great being at this question, conning over in his mind his mariner's lore, answered by repeating the second stanza. Merchants come from Bharukachai, seeking riches to purvey. This is Kuramali Ocean, where your ship has gone astray. Now it happens that in this ocean, diamonds are to be found. The great being reflected that if he told them this was a diamond sea, they would sink the ship in their greed by collecting the diamonds. So he told them nothing. But having brought the ship to, he got a rope and lowered a net, as if to catch fish. With this he brought in a haul of diamonds and stored them in the ship. Then he caused the wares of little value to be cast overboard. The ship passed over the sea and came to another called Agimala. This sea sent forth a radiance like a blazing bonfire. Like the sun at midday, the merchants questioned him in this stanza. Lo, an ocean like a bonfire blaze, like the sun we see. Speak, Suparika, and tell us what the name of this may be. The great being replied to them in the stanza next following. Merchants come here from Bharukacha, seeking riches to purvey. This is Agimali Ocean, where your ship has gone astray. Now in this sea was abundance of gold, in the same manner as before. He got a haul of gold from it, and laid it aboard. Passing over the sea, the ship next came to an ocean called Dadimali, gleaming like milk or curds. The merchants inquired the same in a stanza. Lo, an ocean white and milky, white as curds we seem to see. Speak, Suparika, and tell us what the name of this may be. The great being answered them by the stanza next following. Merchants come from Bharukacha, seeking riches to purvey. This is Dadimali Ocean, where your ship has gone astray. In this sea there was abundance of silver. He procured it in the same way as before, and laid it aboard. Over the sea the ship sailed, and came to an ocean called Neelavarna Kusamala, which had the appearance of a stretch of dark kusha grass or a field of corn. The merchants inquired its name in a stanza. Lo, an ocean green and grassy, like young corn we seem to see. Speak, Suparika, and tell us what the name of this may be. He replied in the words of the stanza next following. Merchants come from Bharukacha seeking riches to purvey. This is Kusamali, ocean, where your ship has gone astray. Now in this ocean was a great quantity of precious emeralds. As before, he made a haul of them, and stowed them on board. Passing over the sea, the ship came to a sea called Nalamala, which had the aspect of a span of reed or a bamboo grove. The merchants asked its name in a stanza. Lo, an ocean like a reed bed, like a bamboo grove we see. Speak, Soparaka, and tell us what the name of this may be. The great being replied by the following stanza. Merchants come from Bharukacha, seeking riches to purvey. This is Nalamali, ocean where your ship has gone astray. Now this ocean was full of coral, of the color of bamboos. He made a haul of this also and got it aboard. What the above stanza tells us is that the oceans of the world contain a lot of treasure. That's not just the lore of the pirate stories we've heard from the West. It was also what merchants in ancient India lived by in the good old days. In this Jataka story, one finds mention of different oceans and seas as full of diamonds, gold, silver, emerald and coral, which is in a way a prelude to the Puranic narrative of the Samudra Manthan, where precious goods emanate from the bowels of the ocean. Suparaka is the Bodhisattva recalling one of his past lives, and he's found a parable in the sea. That's not just about stories of exotica, but is a vehicle to convey the virtues of restraint and self-contentment. Another thing one needs to notice is the names of the oceans mentioned in this parable. One cannot help but wonder where is the act of naming coming from, because all these names have parallels in relatable substances on land which are peculiar in their composition and physiology. The Suparaka Jataka conveys many things to many people. To a historian, it is a repository of information on the cultural landscape of the time. To the spiritually inclined, it is a lesson to show restraint and contentment. But our main take away from the Suparaka Jataka is that the oceans being a fantastical medium that it is symbolic of the free and the unhindered, and yet it is the teacher of restraint and non-transgression. Thank you.
Hi, I'm Ashwini Navathe, Archives and Collection Associate at Maritime History Society. I'm going to recite a poem by Rabindranath Tagore titled On the Seashore. This beautiful poem that features children playing on the limitless seashore is the 60th poem in the English translation of Tagore's Gitanjali, published in the year 1912. The poem explores the nonchalant and the blissfully ignorant ways of the children in facing the perils of the potentially dangerous sea or life itself, as opposed to those of the adults. On the Seashore by Rabindranath Tagore. On the seashore of endless worlds children meet. The infinite sky is motionless overhead, and the restless water is boisterous. On the seashore of endless worlds, children meet with shouts and dances. They build their houses with sand, and they play with empty shells. With withered leaves they weave their boats, and smilingly float them on the vast deep. Children have their play on the seashore of worlds. They know not how to swim, they know not how to cast nets. Pearl fishers dive for pearls, merchants sail in their ships, while children gather pebbles and scatter them again. They seek not for hidden treasures, they know not how to cast nets. The sea surges up with laughter, and the pale gleams with the smile of the sea beach. Death-dealing waves sing meaningless ballads to the children, even like a mother while rocking her baby's cradle. The sea plays with the children, and the pale gleams with the smile of the sea beach. On the seashore of endless world the children meet. Tempest roams in the pathless sky, ships are wrecked in the trackless water. Death is abroad, and the children play. On the seashore of the endless worlds is the great meeting of children. On the seashore of the endless worlds is the great meeting of children. The poem is a beautiful specimen of the contrast between the sea and the seashore. The sea, as it is perceived by the non-sailors, non-mariners, is the source of trepidation. But look at the children. They are not sailors and mariners, at least not yet. How are they untouched by the fear? The sea, in fact, is a mother to them. Its waves surge in laughter. The seashore and the sea are emphatic towards the children, watching them play joyously. The sea plays with them. In a way, the poem is about the life on the coast all over the world. All those who live near the coast are children of the sea. The sea looks after them all. As a sea poem, it talks about the relationship between the sea and life as expressed through play. We may have the best tools to navigate both the sea and life, but the right way to engage with it is the act of playing. Tagore creates a beautiful setting of that of the seashore. Why are the children of the world not meeting in the caves of the world or on the terraces of the skyscrapers of the world? Why does Tagore not visualize them on open meadows? Why on the seashore? The sea must be life itself. The sea must be the space for life. The sea must be the way of looking at life. Here are death-dealing waves, but they are singing ballads to the children. The children are untouched by the tempest and wrecks. Do we, the non-mariner adults, approach the sea without bothering about death, tempests, and wrecks? Do we approach the sea with an openness that comes even to the sailors with great difficulty? The poem says that there is a lot more to what comes across as dangerous. The seashore will help you to see the play and the music. Thank you.
Hello everyone, I am Sabha Purkar and I am the Academic Assistant at Maritime History Society. Welcome to the Monsoon Musings. Today I am going to recite a poem titled Ars Pacifica by Craig Santos Perez, a poet from the Pacific Islands. When the tide of silence rises, say ocean. Then with the paddle of your tongue, rearrange the letters to form canoe. This is a poem by a contemporary poet published barely 2 months back on a leading poetry website. One can't help but admire the economy of words in the poem. One can't help but notice how the ocean becomes the perfect metaphor for attitudes towards things that can be overwhelming. It's an ocean, so what? Turn it into a canoe. Not just the same letters form the words, but in terms of our perspective to the surroundings, of turning crisis into opportunity as the cliche goes these days. Like Tagore's poems we heard earlier, this one too talks about the sea as a metaphor of how the same thing can mean two extreme things, as is life in general. Tongue is compared with the paddle. Paddling makes all the difference in a voyage, just as the words we utter make or break the situation. It is also pushing for a change in attitude of the person looking at the ocean. Should we be scared of it? Should we plunge into its depths? Sailing and drowning are matters of perspective. Surviving and dying are matters of agency and action. The poem also conveys the metaphor of solution hidden in the problem itself and depicts the turnings of the tides in our lives just as the ocean. That's the art of sea. See it differently, say it differently. Thank you.
Wow, we've just heard some brilliant perspectives on the sea from the point of view of a river, from the point of view of children, and even the sea as a metaphor. I am Janvi Lokegaonkar, Research Associate at the Maritime History Society, And what I am going to read now is an excerpt from a recently published short story called Pursuit as Happiness by Ernest Hemingway. It's a view of the sea from a boat, a fishing boat at that. In the morning, when the first daylight from across the bay woke me, I got up and started to write a short story that I had hoped Mr. Josie would like. It had the Anita in it, and the waterfront, and the things we knew that had happened, and it tried to get into it the feelings of the sea, and the things that we saw, and smelled, and heard, and felt each day. I worked on the story every morning, and we fished each day and caught good fish. I trained hard and found all the fish while standing instead of sitting in a chair. And still the big fish had not come. One day, we saw one towing a commercial fisherman's dinghy with the dinghy down by the bows and the marlin making splashes as a speedboat would each time he jumped. That one broke off. Another day, in a rain squall, we saw 4 men trying to hoist one, wide and deep and dark purple, into a skiff. That marlin dressed out 500 pounds, and I saw the huge stakes cut from him on the marble slab in the old market. Then, on a sunny day, with a heavy dark stream, the water so clear and in so close that you could see the shoals in the mouth of the harbour 10 fathoms deep, we hit our first big fish just outside the Morro. In those days, there were no outriggers and no rod holders, and I was just letting out a light rig, hoping to pick up a kingfish in the channel when this fish hit. He came out in a surge, and his bill looked like a sawed-off billiard cue. Behind it, his head showed huge, and he looked as wide as a dinghy. Then he passed us in a rush, with the line cutting parallel to the boat and the reel emptying so fast that it was hot to the touch. There were 400 yards of 15-thread line on the reel, and half of it was gone by the time I got into the bow of the Anita. I got there by holding on to the handholds we had built into the top of the house. We had practiced this run and the scramble over the forward deck to where you could brace against the stem of the boat with your feet. But we had never practiced it with a fish that passed you like a subway express when you are at a local station, and with one arm holding the rod, which was bucking and digging into the buttrest, and the other hand and both bare feet breaking on the deck as the fish hauled you forward. "Hook her up, Josie," I yelled. "He's taking all of it." "She is hooked up, Cap. There he goes." By now, I had one foot braced against the stem of the Anita and the other leg against the starboard anchor. Carlos was holding me around the waist, and ahead of us, the fish was jumping. He looked as big around as a wine barrel when he jumped. He was silver in the bright sun, and I could see the broad purple stripes down his sides. Each time he jumped, he made a splash like a horse falling off a cliff, and he jumped and jumped and jumped. The reel was too hot to hold, and the core of line on it was getting thinner and thinner in spite of the Anita going full speed after the fish. "Can you get any more out of her?" I called to Mr. Josie. "Not in this world," he said. "What you got left?" "Damn little." "He's big," Carlos said. "He's the biggest marlin I've ever seen. If only he'll stop. If he'll only go down. Then we'll run upon him and get line." The fish made his first run from just off the Morro Castle to opposite the National Hotel. That is about the way we went. Then, with less than 20 yards of line on the reel, he stopped and we ran upon him, recovering line all the time. I remember that there was a Grace Line ship ahead of us with the black pilot boat going out to her, and I was worried that we might be on her course as she came in. Then I remember watching her while I reeled and then working my way back to the stern and watching the ship pick up her speed. She was coming in well outside of us, and the pilot boat would not foul us either. Pursuit as Happiness was posthumously published last month in the New Yorker. Hemingway's writing with the maritime themes, be it in his famous short novel The Old Man and the Sea, or in this particular short story, depicts his close association with the maritime expanse. The Old Man and the Sea, written by him, is a very well known for its metaphor for life, and this recent short story is a good addition to how we understand the sea through Hemingway's narrative. Not only is he invested in the writing, his work is more of an observational component mixed with fiction to narrate the story. His writing in this story is predicting a good season for fishing the marlins and so on, and it shows just how cleverly he has incorporated the scientific data subtly in his narrative. The story depicts the idea of pursuit of a fish, of happiness as an end in itself. Life at sea, imagined on a boat, can appear to be quite still and lacking in movement. In order to see the movement of time and space, mariners like those who fish use other ways to understand how much time has passed and how much distance they have travelled. Unless something dramatic happens, like the spotting of a fish as Hemingway writes about, the chase at sea is as much thrilling as thrillers can get. And it comes out so strongly in Hemingway's writing because he is an author who did fish. He is a fine example of how to spot a story when there isn't one easily available and how to craft it in the form of a narrative. Hemingway writes passionately about the sea. To highlight his perspective about sea and life in general, let me read a small excerpt from The Old Man and the Sea, which brings attention to his brilliant writing and serves to bring more insights to this particular short story. He always thought of the sea as La Mar, which is what people call her in Spanish when they love her. Sometimes those who love her say bad things of her, but they are always said as though she were a woman. Some of the younger fishermen, those who used buoys as floats for their lines and had motorboats bought when the shark livers had brought much money, spoke of her as Elmar, which is masculine. They spoke of her as a contestant or a place or even an enemy. But the old man always thought of her as a feminine and as something that gave or withheld great favors, and if she did wild or wicked things, it was because she could not help them. The moon affects her as it does a woman, he thought. We have Poseidon and Lord Varuna as the Lord of the Ocean. But Ernest has a different opinion. He sees the ocean as a feminine entity as opposed to many cultures, including our Indian culture, where sea or the ocean is referred to have a masculine entity. Hemingway sees the ocean as a giver, as a woman. In this particular short story, I believe he is appreciating the vast body of maritime expanse and the nature, and I am surrendering to it, learning from it and embracing life. Thank you.
Thanks, Janvi. Greetings to one and all. My name is Amruta Tayodekar and I am a research associate with the Maritime History Society. I will now recite a poem titled Fear by Khalil Gibran. He was a Lebanese-American writer, poet and a visual artist. He is known to have authored some of the best-selling books during his time. It is said that before entering the sea, a river trembles with fear. She looks back at the path she has travelled. From the peaks of the mountains, the long winding road crossing forests and villages, and in front of her, she sees an ocean so vast that to enter there seems nothing more than to disappear forever. But there is no other way. The river cannot go back. Nobody can go back. To go back is impossible in existence. The river needs to take the risk of entering the ocean, because only then will fear disappear. Because that's when the river will know it's not about disappearing into the ocean, but of becoming the ocean. The poem thus talks about ocean and life. The title of the poem makes it obvious that the ocean is all about fear and conquering the fear. And that's like stating the obvious. The ocean plays another role here in this poem. The oceans are like our future. It's there in front of us. The mountains or the peaks of our glory are a matter of the past. And just as one cannot go back into the past, one cannot go back into the illusionary origins. There's no choice but to flow forward. There's no choice but to flow into the ocean. Precisely because there's no running away from the ocean. There's no hiding away from the ocean. Another beautiful idea present in the poem is that of becoming the ocean. We've heard Hollywood wisdom saying that what doesn't kill us makes us stronger. Or, as the Joker would say it, what doesn't kill us makes us stranger. Gibran, centuries ago, said that the best way to face what we fear is of becoming that very thing. How will we fear the ocean if we are the ocean? If we become the ocean? Related to that, becoming is an idea of orienting ourselves and finding ourselves disoriented. The ocean might be scary because the ultimate fear is how will we know if we're lost? In Gibran's words, what if we disappear into the ocean? And Gibran says, if we won't disappear at all, we will become the ocean. Yes, the ocean is the ultimate expression of surrender to the divine and to the idea of life. It's not just about conquering fear, as other poems we've heard today. It's about conquering the self and the ego as well. Thank you.
A very good evening to one and all. I am Aishwarya Devasthali, a project research associate at Maritime History Society. Maritime domain includes forts which defended the ports. Here's a poem dedicated to fort of Sindhudurga, built by Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj in 17th century at Malwa. This fort was built in order to resist influence of European merchants who through their trade grew more powerful on west coast of India. We get this information through an important source known as Bakhars. So Bakhars are a form of historical narrative written in prose. These can be called as one of the earliest genres of medieval Marathi literature. More than 200 Bakhars were written in 17th to 19th century, and most important among them chronicling deeds of Chhatrapati Shivaji Maharaj. Bakhars can be considered as valuable source depicting the Maratha view of history. The present piece is taken from Chitragupta Bakhar, written in year 1760 by Raghunath Yadav Chitri. It is a fine example of all that is involved in maritime heroism. While the other poems we have heard today talk about mysteries associated with sea, its playful and spiritual dimension, or the dramatic power it holds, the present poem is an expression of naval power which is linked with seas, especially in our country which is having a long coastline. As our ancestors built forts to protect their lives, their lands, they also wrote tributes to the fort. The poet glorifies Fort Sindhudurga by saying, महाराजांनी मालवणास सिंधुदुर्ग बांधला आणि तो सर्व जंजिऱ्यात प्रमुख जाहला. सिंधुदुर्ग असेच कौस्तुभमणी या रत्न विलोकिता, नाही आन विधीच यास बदला, याचीच या योग्यता. देवादी असुरांप्रती ही भूधरा, दिल्ला नसे सागरे, तो हा शिवनृपाचा लाभ घडिला श्री शंकराचे वरे. सिंधुदुर्ग समर्थ जाण मणी हा विराजिला भूतळी, दुष्टांचे भय आगळे म्हणून या संरक्षिला महाजळी. सुवर्णांकित द्वारका तदुपरी लंका नये तुळिता. कौस्तुभाहुनी आगळाची गरिमा, त्याचीच त्या योग्यता. किल्ले आणिक जंजिरे गणुनिया, केली नृपे माळिका. सिंधुदुर्ग समर्थ त्यात म्हणे, हा विराजिला हो निका. इत्यादिक स्थळे जशी उडुगणे, चंद्रोपमा त्या नसे. जंजिरा विधू दुसराच भूतळी, हे सत्य जाणा असे. सिंगाल दीप रमणीया हुनावर आला, ओवाळणी करून या त्यक्षणे तयाला. विलायता मस्कता हीनताच आली, गोमांतकादिक स्थळे तृणतुल्य झाली. तैसीचाही पुर्तकाळ उपमा, पावेचा ना सर्वथा. सिंधुदुर्ग समर्थ जाण विलसे, इत्यादी पाहो वृथा. ऐसा हा नृपतीस दुर्ग सदये, श्री सागरास अर्पिला. काळाची जणू भिन्नताच घडली, प्रत्यक्ष निरीक्षिला. जाणा तोजळी पद्मदुर्ग म्हणवी, तांडेल आहे सदा. उंदेरी अति सान हीनची असे, दीनत्व भावी पदा. सिंधुदुर्ग प्रिय अतिरमणिका, रत्नागिरी नेटकी. दुजी अंजनवेली फार विलसे, आहे स्वरूपी निकी. किल्ले कोट अगण्य जाणची असे, सेना सदा भूतळी. सिंधुदुर्गची स्वामी हा ही सकळा, आशोभ आहे जळी. त्याची नाटकी वर्णिलीच गरिमा, चातुर्य विलोकिजे. सन्माने प्रति पाळणसी करणे, हे इतुके अर्पिजे.
The poet sums it up saying, सिंधुदुर्ग जंजिरा जगी जणू अस्मानी तारा. जैसे मंदिरांचे मंडन श्री तुळसी वृंदावन, महाराजांचे राज्याचे भूषणप्रद अलंकार. Poetry and literature play a great role in evoking sense of pride amongst communities. It is a fitting that we take a note that such maritime monuments being praised in poetry and literature. It is thanks to pieces like these that we have a sense of how people who lived in and around Sindhudurga saw history as it unfolded in front of their lives and times.
We started with a voyage in a Jataka and ended with landing on a fort back home. On the way, we encountered snapshots of children playing on the seashore. We saw an ocean turning into a canoe. We saw the pursuit of fish. We came across a river becoming an ocean, and we paid tribute to our maritime heritage. It's a good beginning in appreciating the beauty of exploring the maritime medium through literature. Just as we need to do a lot to understand maritime history, we must also take a fresh look at what the maritime dimension does to literary devices of metaphors and to the components of the narrative. The ocean is life, and the stuff of literature is also life. We look forward to exploring the intersection between ocean and literature as we go along. Thank you. We are back live. Let me announce once again that you can please drop your comments in the Q&A section to share your observations about the presented literary texts or literature and the maritime medium in general. With that, we come to the end of the video, but the beginning of a literary sensibility that we hope stays with all of us. But wait, there is more. As we close, we invite Anjali Purohit to share her thoughts about literature and the maritime medium. Anjali Purohit is an author, poet, translator, and curator. She is the author of 2 books, Ragi Ragini, Chronicles from Aji's Kitchen, and Go Talk to the River, the OVs of Bahinabai Chaudhary, both published by Yoda Press. Her writing has also featured in several anthologies and literary journals. She is the founder and curator of the Cappuccino Adda. She is presently working on her forthcoming book of poetry. But that's just what people know about her generally. In my interaction with her, I have understood her to be a kind of soul you only imagine authors and poets to be like. She's warm, she's encouraging, she's curious, she's kind. The moment I heard her say hello on the phone, I knew we would be very delighted if she agrees to be a part of the evening. And indeed, here she is, and it's just perfect. We look forward to listen to what you have to say, ma'am, about the oceans of the world and the world as we see it in literature. Over to you, ma'am.
Thank you, Soni, for that very warm and generous introduction. Before I begin, I would like to express my gratitude to the Maritime History Society and also specially to Commodore Odakal Johnson for inviting me to this really feast of texts and readings that the young researchers at the Society have put together. If we attempt to explore maritime history as reflected in literature, then what predominantly stands out is the fact that maritime travel, expeditions, development is intrinsically linked with trade and the economic history of the world. One of the happy outcomes of this activity is the syncretic exchange of cultures, language, narratives, and indeed peoples who went from one land to another and settled in those foreign lands, after which assimilating those cultures into their own and giving from their cultures to that host country. Therefore, I was very happy to hear today's stories with such a wide range across times as well as geography. Traveling from the Marathi Bakhars about Sindhudurg that Aishwarya read so well, going to the Suparaka Jataka that Denard touched upon, and if we remember, the Jataka tales themselves have traveled widely to Southeast Asia, Cambodia, Vietnam, even Tibet, and have been translated into Persian. From there, your researchers took us to Lebanon, to Guam, to America, and back again to India with Rabindranath Tagore. Literature that was woven around maritime tropes is, I think, possibly as vast as the oceans themselves. Therefore, I would not really even attempt to encompass the whole gamut of such literature. Instead, I will just briefly touch upon a few books that in my life have brought the sea to me. And of course, the very first one is as children, not just me, but so many others have been fascinated by the 7 voyages of Sinbad the Sailor from the 1001 Arabian Nights. The sea, a child is always curious to know what lies beyond the horizon, and the sea and the oceans and large waterways um, are um, are the places which allow for the largest and the most expansive horizons to a child. Therefore, Sinbad the Sailor would have a special place, I believe, in every child who has read them. After that, I would like to speak about a poem, The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which was introduced to us in school, written by Samuel Taylor Coleridge. It was published in 1797. And The Rime of the Ancient Mariner, which is a slightly longish poem, it explores the idea of sin, suffering, and salvation. Sin is when a sailor, the ancient mariner, um, kills the albatross, after which he is condemned, and the whole ship and its crew is condemned to suffering. And so the famous line, water, water everywhere, nor any drop to drink. And salvation finally comes to the ancient mariner when he expresses love and recognizes the beauty of nature and every beast that lives in nature. After that, one of the books that is lesser known. Of course, we have already spoken about Hemingway, Old Man and the Sea, but one book and one author that is lesser known generally is Eugene Sue, who lived from 1804 to 57, and wrote this particular book called The Wandering Jew. Eugene Sue himself was a physician, a surgeon, and he was in the French Navy. He spent 6 years in the Navy, serving in two wars for France. And then he returned to France and became a very popular novelist, writing The Wandering Jew, which brought him worldwide fame. He was also very active in the liberal politics of that time in France. And after the coup d'état of 1851, when Louis Napoleon III overthrew a somewhat democratically established form of government and established his own monarchy, Eugene Sue was forced into exile and died in banishment 5 years later. The Wandering Jew, written in 1844, takes off from the legend uh, where the Jew on whose doorstep Jesus wants to rest on the way to crucifixion. And he taunts him in some versions of the story. He strikes him and tells him not to rest at his door and to move on. After which, this a Jew is condemned and cursed to forever wander and not rest till the second coming. But apart from this particular theme, the Wandering Jew has very many subtexts, and um, here, the Wandering Jew also represents the cholera epidemic, because wherever the Wandering Jew travels, and he travels all over the world, he is followed by various epidemics in his wake, and it is strange that we ourselves are today living through a rather difficult period of great illness striking the land. During the same period, and in France again, was another giant of an author, Victor Hugo, who in fact was also in many ways with having a liberal democratic outlook. And similarly to Eugene Sue, Victor Hugo was also exiled to the island of Guernsey after that same particular coup. Victor Hugo, of course, is famous for his other books, Les Miserables and The Hunchback of Notre Dame. But I would like to touch upon his book, which was, I think, published in 1866, called Toilers of the Sea. And this particular book is dedicated to that island of Guernsey, where he spent 15 years in exile. Um, the book itself is set just after the Napoleonic Wars and deals with the impact of the Industrial Revolution on the island and its people. Then, coming several centuries ahead, I would like to speak about Amitav Ghosh's Ibis trilogy, Sea of Poppies, River of Smoke, and Flood of Fire, which together are very closely linked with maritime trade and history. The backdrop, of course, there are two themes that run through it. One of them is the great experiment which British India indulged in by taking indentured workers from India to work on the sugar plantations of Mauritius. And secondly, the opium trade that took opium from India to China, and where the British Navy itself played a significant part when mercantile traders waged wars and created markets of opium for themselves in the name of free trade. Another book I was greatly influenced by is one published very recently, about 2 to 3 years ago, a book of poetry by Ranjit Hoskote called Jonah Whale. And this entire book talks about the histories of the seas. It deals with myths, with the mobility that comes from travel with the seas. And mostly when we speak of histories, we speak of histories of nations, but not looking at what a big part the sea and the oceans have played in world history. About this book, I will quote Ranjit Hoskote himself, which would give you some idea, and then I would like to read a small poem of his from the book. Ranjit says about Jonah Whale, I have long been fascinated by geographical and cultural mobility across land as well as water. The manner in which people over the centuries have created webs of interrelatedness across natural boundaries and in defiance of territorial borders. I warm to the way in which pilgrims and merchants, scholars and artisans, soldiers and monks, storytellers and sailors have met in shifting contact zones and created new continents of affinity. Later, he says, water allows for particularly dramatic transcultural journeys, epic migrations, long arcs of travel that carry people, goods, ideas, beliefs, narratives, and art forms from one place to another in the most unexpected ways. This particular poem I'd like to read from the book Jonah Whale is titled Ocean. My name is Ocean. I shall not be contained. My tides spell starting gun and finish line. Afterwards, only shells and scattered roofs will remind you I was there. My combers wash away the roots of trees, towns, the shaken heart. But mortals, there's hope. My breakers hurl seeds back at your shores. After the flood, the chroniclers will write in Konkani, Sabir, Aimaru, Tulu, Jarwa, Creo, Tokpisin. After the flood, the beach exploded with giant peacock trees in whose branches on windy days, you could hear the surge and swell of ocean summoning whales, whalers who chased blood wakes, red-haired women who fought pirates, sleepless harpooners who sailed from fjordland to where volcanoes splintered the sleeping ice, furies who choked pearl drivers, drove catamarans aground, voyagers who fell into the sea and grew wings. Ocean reciting from his depths, every drifting epic of pursuit, every song of shipwreck, every trace of raft and sail and trailing anchor, flotsam, jetsam, pakram, vellum, he could remember. After that very beautiful poem, I would end with a very short, because Sony asked me to read something of my own, a small 6-line poem, and with a little anecdote attached to it. A friend of mine, Sanjay Dharwadkar, is a very brilliant essayist, especially of travel essays. He's also released a novel last year called Diamond in My Palm. He lives in South Africa, Johannesburg, and he wrote this particular essay about his trip, his road trip from Johannesburg to Cape Town. Now, Cape Town, as you know, is located at the Cape of Good Hope, which was during those times one of the most dangerous capes for ships because there were very many shipwrecks in that particular sea. So there was a maritime museum there, and Sanjay and his wife went visiting to that museum, where the wreckage from many of these shipwrecks was placed and neatly labeled, and they were accompanied by a young Navy officer who was explaining all the objects in the museum. He said yes, and most of the ships that had sunk and whose wreckage there was had names of European and British royalty, of Greek gods and other Greek figures. And he said there is this one particular exhibit of wreckage from a ship whose name I cannot understand what it is. And so Sanjay looked, and the name of that ship was Narmada. After which, of course, he informed the naval officer as to the fact that Narmada was a river in India. And that particular ship had sunk with all of its crew had died. And he dug a little further, and he found that in the graveyard at Cape Town, and they have a memorial to the crew of this ship Narmada, and all the names of the crew in the ship have been very painstakingly inscribed onto that tombstone. When I read the story of Dharwadkar's, I was very moved, as indeed he was too when he saw that tombstone. And so this small poem got written. The poem is titled Words Like Ships and People. Strange that words reach distant shores and stay shipwrecked, a mystery to themselves, an anomaly to that land of accident. And with that, I close my concluding remarks on this very beautiful session of readings around literature and maritime history. And with another thank you to the Society and to Commodore Johnson for really giving me this opportunity to listen to such an eclectic selection of texts. Thank you very much.
Thank you, ma'am, for your insights. We are delighted to have you become a part of the evening and listen to you talk and read. Your presence means a lot to us. Let me announce that we will, thank you for your responses to the poll as well. We'll try to incorporate your thoughts in our upcoming programs. This is for the audience. With that, I now call upon our director, Commodore Oracle Johnson, to make a few announcements regarding what's upcoming from MHS. He does not need any introduction, but for those who are attending an MHS program for the first time, Commodore Johnson is an unusual leader. He's a sailor turned scholar whose navigational expertise, matched with his active involvement in academics, made our founder, late Admiral M.P. Avati, trust Commodore Johnson with the charge of taking MHS ahead. With multiple books to his credit, he stands out in the field of maritime history as emerging from India thanks to his background as a sailor. He is the force behind bringing together a full fledged research team and steering original research on Indian maritime history. When he's not pushing us hard to do better, he spends his time thinking about how to push us harder, or so we suspect. You'll enjoy meeting him if you haven't met him already. Over to you, sir.
Thank you. Anjali Purohit, it's wonderful to, of course, hear you as always. Dr. Soni Wadhwa, the Joint Director Research. Friends and supporters of Maritime History Society, thank you for joining us in strength. Your support is really important to us. May I begin by acknowledging you, Anjali, for being a good friend of MHS. You introduced us to the literature section at Kala Ghoda, though that was probably your year of interaction. But today your presence and your readings really were illustrative motivation to those who cherish the maritime dimension. I've had some comments I was reading in the chat box. That was great. Team Manthan, the set of researchers are very keen ocean enthusiasts. And if I borrow from Sabha's words from Ars Pacifica, they have twisted the tongue to make an ocean into canoe across life. So thank you, my young mariner team, but thank you to all the extended mariners and scholars who have come up with important observations and comments to help us improve and what we can do differently. Before we close, a couple of announcements. The third of our monsoon musing is scheduled for 20th August 2020. Amrita, the next slide. It's going to be a panel discussion on maritime industry through and post pandemic. Do also spread the word about the Admiral J.G. Nadkarni Memorial Essay Competition on reflections on Indian nautical knowledge, past, present, and ways ahead. And the call for submissions will be on the website by the end of the month. Do keep in touch. And before you go, just to let you know that these are our social media and connect handles, our website, mhsindia.org, a YouTube channel. We are there on Instagram and Twitter. Hopefully with this, we cover the entire spectrum. Thank you all. Thank you, Anjali. Thanks the whole team. Wish each one of you great health in the safety of your homes, and may you continue to engage in meaningful maritime conversations. Thank you. Have a wonderful evening.